Here are the top 100 Benoni traps against the queen's pawn game that you can try out in classical, rapid, blitz, and bullet chess. Trap number 1. After pawn to d4, just go ahead and play pawn to c5 in an effort to exchange your c-pawn with white's d-pawn, like what they do in the Sicilian. Now guys, this is very much playable even in classical tournaments or even in rapid and blitz. So we first begin with the amateur trap before advancing to some other high-level traps. D takes c5. Well, after this, you can simply go pawn to e6. If your beginner opponents try to hold on to this pawn, this is when you simply go pawn to a5. That's how we break this pawn chain that occurs from the queen side. Pawn to a3 is ridiculous due to ab, and white can't even take back because of rook takes. That's why most beginners choose to go pawn to c3, after which you can now take, and after cb, the top played move, it's time for white to forget about chess and rather concentrate on love and relationships, because queen f6 actually wins a free piece like a knight. Trap number 2, after d4, pawn to c5 and still pawn takes. You can still go pawn to e6, but against advanced players, you're not going to see this amateur move. In fact, knight to f3 is the top played move. Sometimes they play knight c3. Now after this, the best you can do is just to go knight to f6. No need to rush with this capture because that pawn is already a dead pawn. You can even get it this way. If white tries to hold on to e, by the way, you still go pawn to a5. All these moves will just give you an urge. After they take back, you can launch the minority attack immediately if you want. But the move I like here is knight c6, attacking the pawn on b4 immediately. If pawn to b5, we have queen a5 check and win back that pawn immediately, plus attacking this other pawn on c5. If white plays pawn to a3, again that fails due to knight takes b4, and instead of that, let's say white plays bishop d2, holding on to this pawn. So in this Benoni line, the move I recommend whenever you see bishop d2 is knight e4. Given a chance, you want to get rid of that bishop with your knight so that you remain with your bishop pair at worst. If white plays the top played move pawn to e3, as you can see, now this is when you play queen f6, and there's nothing that white can do about this. Just like in the first trap that we saw, they are still going to lose a free piece. Oh, what if white plays the top played move in the Lichess database, knight d4? Ha! You know what? Let me leave this for you guys. Find the best move in 3 seconds and leave your answers in the comment section down below. Can't be talking about this. Come on. So instead of bishop d2, if white plays queen b3, the top played move in the Masters database, this is when you can launch the minority attack like you should always do in the Benoni Gambit like this. At best, you just want to get back your pawn. If pawn takes, by the way, first of all, you take on b4 with check, and after bishop d2, what did I say about this move? Well, in this Benoni Gambit, you always want to meet bishop d2 with knight e4. Of course, you can take back on b6 if you don't like taking risks, and that's fine. So after bishop takes, that's when you take on b6 with your queen. If this bishop moves, it's not the queen you are after, it's the pawn on f2. So after king d1, you simply retreat your queen back, leaving this pawn undefended, of course, because after bishop takes, you can first of all rescue your rook, and once that bishop goes back, you now get the free rook, hence getting back a piece that you lost in return. By the way, even if you don't manage to get back your piece in this line, Stockfish still considers this as a winning position for black. You can do your analysis later, check on Stockfish. For example, if white plays bishop e1, just as an example, you can go rook b8. There are so many things that you can do. And let's just say queen c2, because what else? White is attacking your knight, so you have to defend it, right? It seems like you won't get back your piece, but white has no play in this position. Talk of pawn to e3. Taking is a sheer waste of time. You can just cast a shot if you want, putting your king to safety first. Let's say they try to defend their pawn. You have rook b2. Every move by white leaves a certain weakness, and you have so many open lines, so you don't even need to have equal material in this line. This is clearly winning for black. Anyway, so after c takes b4 on move number 6 and knight c6, if white plays queen b3, then after b6, they don't take, but rather try to hold on to this pawn with bishop e3, or you can just go ahead and take that pawn. and after bishop takes, you take back with your bishop, and they'll be glad enough to take back with the pawn. But nevertheless, you have queen a5 check, and whatever they do, you will simply get back that pawn and equalize. White's a pawn is not a passed pawn because there are too many defenders on the queen side that will block and capture that pawn in many ways. Anyway, trap number 3 after d4, c5, and pawn to c4. This is the third common move, and I want you to learn something new from here, you guys. After this, you can just take on d4 with no problem at all. White may take immediately or play the top played move in the master's database, knight to f3. They would love to take that pawn with the knight because queen takes runs into knight c6. But guess what? You can simply defend the d4 pawn this way, because if white carelessly takes your pawn on e5, they will lose a piece after queen a5 check, and on the next move, that knight will be a goner. Anyways, after pawn to e5, if they don't take, and let's say go pawn to e3, the best you can do to keep everything simple is to take the e3 pawn, and after bishop takes, you completely ignore that pawn and develop your king's knight. Again, if knight takes e5, you have queen a5 check and you're going to grab that piece. So if knight c3, now you no longer have queen a5 check. So this is when you develop your queen's knight defending your pawn. And in this line, you are just up a full pawn for nothing. Bishop e2 may be played. You simply go bishop b4 because that's the only place where you can develop your dark squared bishop, pinning white's knight. If white castles short, feel free to take so that you mess up white's pawn structure. Trap number 4, after d4, c5, d5, and pawn to e5. Once again, after pawn to e4, you can just go pawn to d6 as usual. And in case of an early pawn to f4, you just remember to take. Yes, black's pawn on d6 is the major weakness in the Benoni. But I want you to notice something, you guys. White also weakened these highlighted squares, which you can try to take advantage of. After bishop takes f4, for example, you can go crazy right away if you want with a move pawn to g5. This is the fastest way to involve your dark squared bishop as well, and maybe putting it on e5, replacing that pawn. If bishop g3, just as an example, you can simply go pawn to h5. By the way, checking the master's database, this is black's game. In this position, the only best move for white is pawn to h4. And if you want, you can take on h4, and after bishop takes, you develop your bishop with tempo. This looks scary, but even after rook takes, you have queen takes e4 check first. White has to be very careful not to block with the bishop or the knight. For example, after bishop e2, they will just end up losing a free rook. So in view of this, white has to block this check with queen e2, and this is when you need to take. And after bishop takes, you simply grab the rook and develop your king's knight with tempo. And once the bishop goes back, you start with the knight development, since it's easy to develop your bishop, right? And let's say pawn to c4, you now go knight e5, attacking two things. White has to do something, after which you now develop your bishop, and you don't even have to castle long in this position. Once the dust settles, you can just lift your king and involve your rook into the game. So the whole idea is to oversimplify the queen's pawn game and take it straight into an end game. Trap number 5, after d4, again you simply go pawn to c5, d5. This is called the Benoni defense, you guys. By the way, I have a very beautiful course on the check Benoni. You can check it on my website. Some black players prefer going into the Benko Gambit as highlighted. That will be another video for another day, but just equalize immediately with pawn to e5. And just for your own information, there is no pawn to d6 due to queen b6. That pawn will die, so they play pawn to e4, the top played move, and this is when you can play pawn to d6, closing down the center immediately and start focusing on the sides of the board. By the way, there's a new theoretical line that begins with knight a6. Very cool stuff. First of all, there is no bishop takes, just to mention, because of queen a5 check, and on the next move you win that. So that's just a little trap or a little trick to keep in mind. The idea is just to put that knight here. It's much better on c7 after you play pawn to d6 and you'll be cool. But the main area of our meat is pawn to d6 in this position, because your queen's knight will sit on g6 someday. If they go pawn to c4, grabbing more central space, Well, this is when you can go knight to f6 or bishop e7, it doesn't matter. After knight c3, there are so many things you can do. For example, bishop g5, exchanging bishops is okay, and also knight to f6, because after something like knight to f3, you can go h6, let's say bishop d3, castling short can wait, because you still have some moves to develop. Let's say castle short, you go knight to f8, pawn to h3, knight to g6, bishop e3, you castle short, and pawn to a4 can be met with pawn to a5. You just stop that for good. This is very much playable even in rapid. The long-term plan is to go knight h7 and try to exchange some pieces on the king side. White's knight on b5 is attacking nothing, and it can easily be exchanged with bishop d7 and take. Then you close down the position. This is the safest way I can recommend to play against a queen's pawn in classical games. Right. Before I show you some other exciting traps, I want to address one common issue that black players face in this classical line after d4, c5, d5, e5, e4, then d6, pawn to c4, and bishop e7. There are times when white develops their knight on e2. How should you respond to this? For example, pawn to f5. Whenever you see this, sooner or later, the best you can do is just to get rid of that pawn. You don't want to allow white to sit on f5. Just a word of advice. So ef, let them take. It will be your dark squared bishop that will sit on e5, supported by your queen's knight and your queen. So you begin with bishop f6 most of the times, as if you're attacking this, and after knight c3, it's up to you to take the knight and mess up white's pawn structure if you want. Now you simply go knight d7, because you simply want to put that knight on e5. In most cases, this doesn't work, like in this particular position. For example, if bishop takes happens, you first of all take on c3 with check, mess up white's pawn structure, and then you put your queen on f6, attacking both the bishop and this pawn. But the way to do this is to go queen h4 first of all, provoking a weakness, and instead of taking, realizing that white can pin your queen, this is when you put your queen on f6, attacking the bishop and also this pawn. See that there's a weakness on the queen side, so you're not the only one who has a weakness on the center. So white has to retreat the bishop, after which you go queen takes, and if bishop d2, you can simply go queen d4 and let your queen rest, because there's no knight to f3 or knight e2 due to queen takes. By the way, knight e5 is coming, followed by knight to f6 and castle short. These pawns look dangerous, but they are not going anywhere because we have a lot of pieces. So this is one way of dealing with the f5 pawn move. If you don't want to go this route, after knight c3, instead of going knight d7 immediately, just go knight e7, change your strategy, because it's the king's knight that you want to put on e5 now. If you don't want to lose the d6 pawn, let's say knight b5 comes, double attacking this pawn. Yes, this is okay, but the best you can do is just to castle short here. Knight takes is a blunder due to bishop takes, and on the next move, you can simply go bishop c3 check. That king has to move. Knight g6 is coming, etc. And even if white takes on d6 with a bishop, play the best move, pawn to s6, getting rid of the defender of this bishop on d6. So they will have to take an in-between move first, and then you take, now attacking this pawn. They have to rescue their knight, after which you get rid of that, and on the next move, get that center pawn. And believe it or not, this pawn can never promote easily. That will be a dream come true. We have so many defenders. Anyway, trap number 6, after d4, c5, pawn to d5, and pawn to e5, there are times when white players would take. So in this line, we do not take with the d pawn to avoid an early queen trade. So we take with the f pawn. Never be scared of this. And the top played move is pawn to e4, after which we go knight c6. Normal moves if bishop b5, trying to get rid of your knight and maybe messing up your pawns, you go queen f5 check first. If knight c3, this knight is pinned, so you take advantage of that and develop your king's knight, attacking this pawn. By the way, if bishop takes c6, you can simply take with your b pawn and next prepare to go pawn to d5. But if bishop d2 is played to unpin the knight, you can simply go queen c7 and still prepare to go pawn to d5 after knight to f3, for example. Or you can go bishop e7 first, and after castle short, you simply castle short as well. You have an open file for your rook. So this is very much playable even in classical tournaments. Or instead of playing this way, you can also try to simplify things by going pawn to d5 right away on move 4, intending to go d4 next And if ED happens, you can simply take back. And now preparing to go D4. Knight C6 is coming, knight F6, and so on. Right. Now see guys, let's be honest. Like 100 traps in a YouTube video? Are you serious? Come on. Can you even remember the second trap? I guess not. You can find the remaining Benoni traps on my channel, and do remember to subscribe. You got to be serious, guys. Who does that? 7 is enough. So was this a clickbait title? Hell yeah. First time to clickbait for your own goodness, cause these traps are so practical and I wanted you guys to learn. Right. I feel bad. But that's fine. Hope to see you soon. And bye.